Well, hello, and welcome to another Fireside Chat with Dr. Childress. In today's Fireside Chat, I want to be discussing the 4-day workshops that are in the family courts. Now, with all other pathology, we don't have anything like a 4-day workshop to recover the child or treat the pathology or fix things with depression or anxiety or oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, substance abuse, nothing. In professional psychology, there are no 4-day workshops that solve anything. However, in the family courts, there are. There's several varieties of 4-day workshops that have developed that are designed to recover the child's healthy attachment bond to the targeted rejected parent. And I'm going to be discussing those workshops, not going into detail about how all of them work, because there's different variants. Different people have tried different things. But I'll be doing a broad rundown of what's in the family courts. And there's basically four 4-day workshops. Two are very similar. That would be the Family Bridges and the High Road workshop. And then two are outliers. One was developed by forensic psychologists called Overcoming Barriers, and one was developed by the PAS experts, and that's Turning Points by Linda Gottlieb. And so I'll kind of run down and orient everybody to what the workshops are. Now, one of the reasons that these workshops have developed primarily on the work of Dr. Randy Rand and Richard Warshak, who developed Family Bridges, but then Dr. Rand also collaborated in developing the model with Dorsey Pruter. And so Dr. Rand took his part of the collaboration and worked with Dr. Warshak to develop Family Bridges. Dorsey Pruter took hers to develop High Road. And both of those approaches are psychoeducational approaches. They're not psychotherapeutic approaches. They do something different. And that's one of the reasons they can recover the children in a very brief period of time that other psychotherapy couldn't do. The other reason is this is a false attachment pathology in the family courts. So what needs to happen, or what the approach of the High Road and the Family Bridges take, is to set the context that allows the child's natural attachment bonding motivations to reactivate. And so they're actually working with the natural brain systems and the natural motivation systems of the child. And so those two features: one, it's not a therapeutic approach, and second, it's a false pathology in the family courts, allow the approach used by the High Road protocol of Ms. Pruter and Family Bridges, from what I understand of its protocol, to achieve the success that it does. The other two 4-day workshops, in my opinion, are efforts to sort of copy or ape the accomplishments of Dorsey and Dr. Rand and Dr. Rorschach, without understanding what they did or the principles by which they're doing it. One was by forensic psychologists called Overcoming Barriers, and the other by the PAS experts, specifically Linda Gottlieb, for Turning Points. So let's just start with a broad overview. These are the 4-day recovery workshops. When people talk about recovery workshops, this is what they're talking about. So there's Family Bridges. Originally, this is sort of the original one in the family courts, although Dorsey Pruter has been right there all along. The Family Bridges was fronted by psychologists, or developed and implemented by psychologists, and so it got a little more early traction. And when I came over to the family courts about 10 years ago, I was doing a lit review on what's happening over here, looking at what everybody's doing, looking at all the PAS literature that developed over the years. And I ran into Rorschach's Family Bridges program. And so that was my sort of my first entrance into these 4-day workshops. And then a few years later, I met Dorsey Pruter, and I got to review her protocol and observe her workshop. And absolutely, it's going to be effective. And Ms. Pruter and Dr. Rand worked together in developing the approach, and then Dr. Rand went to work with Warshak, and Dorsey developed hers. So my understanding is they are based on the same basic approach, the basic change agents. I have not reviewed the protocol of family bridges, so I can't speak specifically for that one. I have reviewed the protocol for the High Road workshop, so I can tell you exactly how it's accomplishing its effectiveness. Then several years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, forensic psychologists, particularly Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Deutsch, tried to develop a 4-day workshop approach that they called Overcoming Barriers. It was a complete failure. It was ill-conceived from the approach. They're trying to do what psychologists do. They're trying to do some version of psychotherapy change agents. That's not going to work. That's just not going to work. So that went defunct. And I have concerns about that, developing these experimental approaches based on your own opinions, and then taking people's money supposedly to fix the relationship. And these are court ordered, and they're getting court orders and supposedly to fix a relationship that don't. And even their outcome measures that they report at the time weren't about fixing the relationship. And so they never fixed anything. Yet they're taking money and getting court orders. The other problem with getting the court orders for something that's not effective is that it prevents the family from getting something that is effective. So instead of going to the High Road or potentially family bridges, they went to Overcoming Barriers, and that just put a barrier to the recovery. And so this family lost the opportunity by putting in an ineffective approach. And it was based on a treatment approach. So both Overcoming Barriers and Turning Points are treatment oriented type of models, whereas family bridges and High Road are not. And then Turning Points has been the most recent entry. It's by Linda Gottlieb, who's a social worker, and she's a self-asserted expert in Gardner's PAS. I have substantial problems with Gardner's PAS and that whole model and that way of thinking, and it's just extraordinarily problematic. But then her approach, what she did in her Turning Points, or what she's doing, is also extraordinarily problematic from what I've been able to learn. She doesn't discuss her protocol. She doesn't talk about it. She doesn't answer questions. I've contacted her asking questions. She declines to answer the questions. She declines to provide what she does. And basically, but I've gotten some reports from her through my consulting practice. I've had the opportunity to review reports about what she's done from her. And from basically what I see, she never recovers anybody in 4 days. It's just in my view, it's kind of a shell game where she gets the court order for the protective separation and the workshop. And then at the end of the protective separation, she says, oh, things aren't recovered. We need a longer protective separation. Instead of 3 months, we need 6 months, and then 6 months to a year. And so she's basically using that protective separation period as the intervention or the treatment, which is, in my view, not at all appropriate. But I'll discuss that in a little bit. So there are basically your 4 interventions. There are 4 workshops in the family courts, and you can divide them into 2 groups. And family bridges and High Road are within the same conceptual framework. From my understanding, I'm familiar with the High Road protocol. I know how it works. I understand it. It will be effective. I've watched it be effective over the years. I've got a client out of the High Road that was fully recovered. Family bridges, I can't speak to necessarily because I haven't reviewed the protocol. But Dorsey assures me that it's basically the same approach because of the shared collaboration with Dr. Rand. And so Dorsey and Dr. Rand worked to develop the protocol, and then He took his part over to Family Bridges. So they're basically probably in the same zone of what they do. So starting with the Family Bridges, I said mentioned when I first came over here, this is what I first ran into. And here's probably one of his more basic articles, is Family Bridges using insights from social science to reconnect parents and alienated children. So Dr. Rorschach's been in the family courts for quite a few years. The problem I have with his approach is uh, two things. One is this is child abuse, so we need a protective separation for any of these workshops to be effective. Because if we don't get a protective separation, no intervention for child abuse is going to be effective. And so, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, psychological abuse, if we don't first protect the child from the abuse, and I'm sending the kid home to be abused by the parent, no intervention or no treatment is going to be effective for that. So, as we seek to restore a healthy bond to the targeted parent, if that pathological parent's still trying to keep the child, symptomatic, we're just going to rip the child apart in our differing expectations for the child and our differing motivations, and the child's loyalty conflict between being loyal to the treatment team and the targeted parent and rebonding, and being loyal to the pathological parent who wants the child to remain symptomatic. So we need a protective separation. But from my view as a clinical psychologist, that's creating attachment pathology. So the only reason we would separate a child from a parent is child protection concerns, child abuse. And so I rely, in my approach was, as a clinical psychologist, I rely on the diagnosis of child psychological abuse, shared delusional disorder, factitious disorder. Both of those lead to the child abuse diagnosis. And that then is the justification for the period of protective separation during the treatment and recovery. Parental alienation does not lead to a diagnosis of child abuse. It's just this made up pathology, and that becomes highly problematic. And so this defined pathology called parental alienation in clinical psychology, and we'll discuss that. Dr. Rorschach continues to rely on parental alienation, and so that's going to just be problematic because there's no diagnosis for that. And so I'm unclear as to what he's intervening with, what the pathology is. I know what he kind of thinks it is, but I'm unclear, and it gets hard to define for the court and for other psychologists, and it puts everybody in controversy. Everybody's fighting about whether or not there's parental alienation, whereas if we move to established knowledge, we could end the fighting among the professionals. But even you can see this even here, we're going to be, people are fighting about these workshops and things because they're coming up with this parental alienation kind of idea. We need to stop using the construct of parental alienation for a variety of reasons. It degrades the quality of mental health services. It doesn't exist. It can't be held accountable for the diagnosis. It's been 60 years of failure. So we need to move away from that concept and re-anchor ourselves in established knowledge. So this was, though, the other feature about this when I look at research around Family Bridges is they don't really have good outcome measures. They're reporting, does a child know about conflict, cognitively, but they're not actually measuring or looking at rebonding. Whereas Dorsey Pruter in the High Road actually uses an outcome measure that looks at rebonding. It's ratings from the targeted parent about was the relationship recovered. And so any workshop or any intervention, treatment intervention, therapy, should have an outcome measure on it that looks at rebonding. And that's where I recommend the parent-child relationship rating scale, ratings from the targeted parent on affection, cooperation, social involvement. And we should see the relationship get fixed. If not, we need to adjust our diagnosis or adjust our intervention somehow. So this is kind of the the core or the beginnings of this type of approach in these 4-day workshops. And then along with that came Dorsey Pruter. Now, she's a businesswoman and family coach, but she's been in the family courts for 15 years now, solving this and with the High Road workshop. And in my view, she's the most experienced professional in the family courts regarding recovery and the pathology. She's got a number of resources. In addition to the High Road, she's got a research project she's put together, custody resolution method, doing qualitative content analysis is called. That's the research methodology, content analysis using data coding regarding all the data that gets generated around these families. She also has a parenting program, a higher purpose parenting. That is what I would consider the only trauma-informed parenting curriculum that's available anywhere. I'm familiar with behavioral parent therapy and or behavioral parent training and step parenting and Webster Stratton Incredible Years, all the different types of parenting approaches. I'm familiar with them. And this, I would say, higher purpose parenting is the only trauma informed. And it's for the targeted parent. Nobody else has a parenting program for the targeted parent to stabilize their child. And she trains coaches as well surrounding this pathology. And so she has a number of resources under the umbrella of her Conscious Co-Parenting Institute. So she's definitely, in my view, one of the most experienced. It is the most experienced professional in the family courts regarding recovery. And what this shows, this is actual data from a child, that she recovered through the High Road workshop. This is the research methodology is a single case ABAB design, except we didn't need the second B phase because the child never relapsed. We didn't need to recover them a second time. But so it becomes ABA. The A phase is the pre-intervention phase. So you can see that first A phase, there's no intervention. The B phase there is Dorsey Pruter's High Road workshop. It's a 2-day High Road workshop. I'll explain that in a second. But you can see, and those 3 lines are the targeted parents' ratings on affection, cooperation, and social involvement. So the affection's the blue line, cooperation's the gold line, social involvement is the silver line. And you can see where the child comes in. This is a 15-year-old child. He comes in at 1s and 2s. And then across the B phase of 2 days, the ratings from the targeted parent just skyrocket to 5s and 6s. And this is a targeted parent rating the child on affection, cooperation. So they're not going to falsify the reporting. If the child's not recovered, if they're not having a good they'll say, I'm not having a good relationship with the kid. The kid's still acting out or still problematic. So if we're getting ratings from the targeted parent that there's been this recovery, that the child is affectionate and cooperative and socially involved in things, then we can rely on those. Those are accurate. And so I think this outcome measure, affection, cooperation, social involvement, 7-point scale, should be the outcome measure for all interventions, all therapies. That's the goal, is to fix things. And so any of these 4-day workshops, anybody who wants to put their hat into the ring, I think should document their success based on ratings from the targeted parent. But you can see that, boom, the child went from 1s and 2s at the start of the workshop, just awful, to 5s and 6s at the end of 2 days. 2 days, he's up to 5s and 6s. He's wonderful. He went from awful to wonderful in 2 days through this workshop that Dorsey delivered with him. Then the second A phase is the removal of the intervention, where you expect it to drop back down again when you take but look, he stays stable. Not only did he stay stable, that second A phase is me. I was the follow-up care therapist or the maintenance care therapist for this particular kid. And so that's my initial couple therapy sessions. It kind of shows what's happened. And interestingly, if you look at 1 and 2 there, you see how it's all flat. That relates to why it's only a 2-day rather than a 4-day workshop. So, what the story is around that is this child, 15-year-old child, um, had been subjected to 3 years of documented child psychological abuse by the pathological parent, documented by three different mental health people, two of whom were psychologists. All of them, over the course of this 3-year period, identified the pathological parent as one of the worst narcissistic parents they have ever seen. One said, I've been in practice for 40 years, and this is the worst narcissistic pathology I have ever seen in anybody through 40 years of practice. So, three mental health people all document the child abuse, giving diagnoses of child psychological abuse across 3 years, and the court did nothing. For 3 years, the court didn't do anything. And I find that an abomination. Just when you're getting continued reports from the mental health people that this is child abuse, and the court just doesn't protect the child. Finally, the court ordered the protective separation of the child from the abusive parent, and that's when Dorsey could get involved and with the high road. The problem is, I was presenting over in the Netherlands, and I had invited Dorsey to come over and present with me, and we also met with the um, representatives from the Dutch Ministry of Justice while over there. And so we had this trip going over to the Netherlands to talk and do some stuff over there. And but she was flying out in a couple of days and only had 2 days to do the workshop. She'd either have to wait until she came back, and she'd been following the case for 3 years, and finally the protective separation came in. So what she did was she adjusted her 4-day protocol to make it a 2-day protocol, recovered the child in 2 days, flew over to the Netherlands. We did our talks and things. And then while we were in the Netherlands, that's when she asked me to be the follow-up care therapist, because the child was in the LA region. And so I agreed over there. So that 1 and 2 that you see there, those flat line, was actually when Dorsey and I were over in the Netherlands. And so she got the recovery on the child. Then the child and the parents stayed stable until I could get back and start my therapy around the 4 point there. And all those zeros and numbers are stuff I did in my therapy. I can talk about those later, but right now I'm focused on that B phase, which is incredible. So she got the recovery, and the recovery maintained itself without any additional support until I got back. And then I started doing my therapy things, and you can see the lines going but the child never dropped back to 1s and 2s. So I'm messing with the relationship, I'm doing stuff, and it's stable. So she got a full and complete recovery in 2 days. There's your documented data on that. Now, there's two types of research methodology that can demonstrate causality. One is the randomized control study. The other is a single case ABAB design. Both of those can demonstrate causality. The problem with a single case design is replicability. Can you do it? If it worked for this kid, can it work for other kids in other situations? And so you replicate it. That's what you do with an ABA design, typically about 5 replications, and you've documented the intervention success. Dorsey has like hundreds of kids over the past decades who she's recovered, and she collects data every time. So she documents her B phase every time. If the mental health person just continues to collect the data, you have a ABAB, clinical case intervention, which is considered the highest caliber of clinical intervention, single case ABAB, because it combines both research methodology with the clinical intervention. So it's documented. It's really good. It's considered the highest level because you can see it right there. And so if the mental health people would just continue the documentation, we'd have a single case ABAB on all these kids. And each kid would be their own unique research project to see do we recover them? And yes, they do. So Dorsey and I presented this data to the National Convention of the American Psychological Association, peer reviewed by the president of Division 24, theoretical and philosophical psychology, because this is a new approach. This is a new approach to change, to how we conceptualize change agent. I believe it has applicability. It could be modified and adjusted for other trauma-involved pathologies like substance abuse, prison recidivism. This approach, this change agent approach, isn't like psychotherapy, and it's very effective. Obviously, no psychotherapy can recover a kid in 2 days. This high road did, and there's your data. You want data, you want research, there it is. And so anybody who's going to say that these workshops in the family courts lack data is speaking from ignorance, because there's your data and you can explain it. Now, Dorsey's a businesswoman. She's not a researcher. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm not a researcher. So if you want additional research on this, then get a university researcher over to Dorsey, get a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, and work it out. Conduct the research. She's collecting the data all the time on every kid. And so just put it together and collect the research. There it is. But there's a group of folks in the family courts who don't want a solution. That's the pathology folks and the flying monkeys. The overcoming barriers from the forensic psychologists is like the third in the entries. And it was developed by forensic psychologists too, Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Deutsch. And I'll be talking about forensic psychology and their custody evaluations. I'll address this potentially later. I'm thinking of reviewing Dr. Deutsch's Vita. She's a prominent forensic psychologist over here. But the forensic psychologists tried to copy Dorsey, but they never consulted with her or anything. And it's absolutely entirely ineffective. And I worry about exploitation of these families because it was just didn't work. But they paid their money to get things fixed, but they didn't. Then the most recent entry into the 4-day workshop arena in the family courts is Turning Points by Linda Gottlieb, who's a social worker. She's a self-proclaimed PAS expert. And I have a lot of problems with the PAS experts generally because there's no such thing as parental alienation. They're just making things up. I will assert that they are ignorant and incompetent and unethical. If they want to show me that they are not ignorant, then stop using the word parental alienation and then describe the pathology to me using established knowledge that demonstrates you know the established knowledge. They've just given themselves permission to make things up, and it's solved nothing for 40, 60 years, and it's degraded the quality of mental health services in the family courts and given us exactly what we have. In this situation, no accountability. It's just awful. In addition, there's a substantial controversy beginning to develop around the Turning Points program. There's been a ProPublica expose on it. She's a colleague of Gottlieb's in this parental the PAS expert people. Jennifer Harmon did a supposed research study looking at this, and we'll take a look at that in a second. And that's in Colorado. And so Colorado is questioning both Dr. Harmon's involvement in parental alienation and Linda Gottlieb's program for recovery. I have reviewed as much as I've been able to discover about it, which is fairly substantial. And I have concerns, multiple ethical concerns regarding the Turning Points program. And based on what I would know, I would have concerns that it meets diagnostic criteria for child psychological abuse, specifically an invalidating environment. So, yeah, I have a lot of problems with turning points here. So as we get into this, let me be excruciatingly clear on this. There is no such thing as parental alienation. There's no pathology in professional psychology called parental alienation. That's a made up thing. It's a unicorn. So there is no defined pathology of parental alienation in clinical psychology. And the use of that construct in a professional capacity is substantially beneath professional standards of practice in clinical psychology and is a violation of ethical standard 2.04, bases for scientific and professional judgments of the American Psychological Association Ethics Code. So am I clear? Am I clear? Using that term is a violation of ethical standards, and it degrades the quality of mental health services in the family courts. We need to stop using that, and we need to rely on the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline as required by Standard 2.04. My opinion on the Gardner PAS experts, the self-proclaimed experts, and that's what they do. They just proclaim themselves to be an expert, and they're an expert in the family courts. That's how low the bar is in the family courts. In my view, the Gardnerian PAS experts represent a fringe group of professionals who reject the diagnostic guidance of the American Psychiatric Association and who reject the ethical guidance of the American Psychological Association. So in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association, with the publication of DSM-5, took a full and complete look and review of this construct of parental alienation, and they said, no, it's awful. Not only is there no research support for it, not only are you just making stuff up about it, but the diagnostic indicators that have been developed for this are absolutely awful. They're just awful. They will result in massive amounts of misdiagnosis of the pathology because they're awful diagnostic criteria for it. So for a variety of reasons, primarily simply because it's just made up, we need to get rid of the construct of parental alienation, which is what the American Psychiatric Association said. Now, all professionals would follow the American Psychiatric Association. When they say there's no diagnosis, we would say, okay, there's no diagnosis. But we got a fringe group of professionals here who, I put that in quotes, who believe they know more about diagnosis than the American Psychiatric Association, so they just reject them. The APA says, no, there's no diagnosis. And they say, we don't care. We're just going to continue to do it anyway. And they reject the ethical guidance, Standard 2.04, bases for scientific and professional judgment, by making up new pathology and not applying established knowledge. So their continued reliance on this made-up pathology degrades the quality of mental health services in the family courts. I consider it spreading medical psychiatric misinformation in the general public. And they are unethical. Violations to 2.01, boundaries of competence. They don't know the established knowledge, which is why they don't apply it. And they give themselves permission to make it up because they're lazy. They don't know the established knowledge, 2.01. If they do, show it. Show me that you know the knowledge by describing the pathology without using the term parental alienation. And they are so ignorant. And this is my proof of how ignorant they are. They are so ignorant. Google ignorant, lacking knowledge or information, is ignorant by definition of the English language, that they must rely on making things up from their own imaginings because they don't know the knowledge. And so, I will say right away, I have a lot of problems with parental alienation, with the PAS experts, and what they're doing out there. I believe they're a low quality of mental health professional. So now, in my review of turning points, what I've been able to discover and discern about what they do, because again, Linda Gottlieb is not answering questions about what she does, which I think is highly problematic. But I have, multiple ethical concerns relative to the APA Ethics Code of American Psychological Association. I got 8. And there shouldn't actually be one ethical concern. When you have 8 ethical concerns around anything, that needs outside and independent review. Now, Linda Gottlieb isn't a psychologist, she's a social worker. So she's not subject to the ethical standards of psychologists. But if we look at the ethical standards she is subject to, National Association of Social Workers, I have concerns about 7 ethical violations to that ethics code from Turning Points. And I think my opinion is she needs to address these concerns, multiple ethical concerns regarding her approach. And I put up there as well Jennifer Harman, because Dr. Harman, a researcher out at Colorado State, has joined the parental alienation group and did a supposed research study about Turning Points and found it to be effective in something and safe, which is interesting. So, in addition, the media is beginning to look into this kind of issue, and they're starting to hammer Linda Gottlieb and Jennifer Harman for this parental alienation stuff and what Linda's Turning Points program is. Because again, from all I can discern on that, it doesn't ever fix the child. It just creates a protective separation and then uses that for 6 months, a year, 2 years, until she gets what she wants out of the situation. She's coercing the bond, but it's just a nightmare kind of approach from my view. But I'm more than happy to debate it anytime. Put Linda Gottlieb on one side of the debate, put me on the other, and we can talk about this, or just get her to answer questions. So this was the article on ProPublica. A court ordered siblings to a reunification camp with their estranged father. The children say it was abusive, by Hannah Dreyfus, May of 23. So one of the things she says, she opens with, family courts are increasingly using programs like Turning Points for families to treat the disputed psychological theory of parental alienation. Now, I want to point out to everybody that within the general public, within the what everybody else is looking at, they call it a disputed psychological theory of parental alienation. The mental health people need to stop fighting about this. And parental alienation just drives us into fighting. We've been fighting about this for 60 years. Apply knowledge so we can stop fighting. We can all get on the same page and we can all solve the pathology. That's why I have big problems with the PAS experts for not stopping this made-up pathology and shifting over to established knowledge, because they continue the fighting in the family courts, and they just won't stop. They just continue because they want to be experts in something, but they're not experts in any real thing. So the moment we leave parental alienation, all these self-proclaimed experts cease to be experts in anything, because it's all a false pathology. It's a pathology of lies. Everything is a pathology of lies. So, but little is publicly known about the program's controversial methods. Okay, and so that's what we're stuck in with parental alienation, is we just get this continued controversy and continued fighting. So it goes on to say, in April, Colorado lawmakers approved a bill to prohibit state courts from using reunification programs like Turning Points. First off, there's no program like Turning Points. It is made up by a social worker. It's, in my view, extraordinarily bad. The other workshops are not like Turning Points. Overcoming Barriers was something entirely different, and it didn't work. But Family Bridges and High Road are nothing like Turning Points. So, yeah, that's a false statement. Lawmakers in California and Montana are considering similar bills. In a recent United Nations Human Rights Council special report recommended that court-ordered reunification camps be prohibited. Well, that's based on ignorance, because they don't know what actually happens. Okay, so let me back up for a second here to this. So if you're going to prohibit this, you're going to prohibit the child's recovery in a matter of days from 3 years of documented child abuse. If you're going to prohibit that, you need to know what you're talking about. You need to know what the protocol is. You need to know what the data is around it. And you need to stop comparing this to turning points or just speaking from your own ignorance about the topic. Because this is child abuse and this is serious. Don't be lazy. So if you're going to start saying we need to prohibit this stuff, you need to know what you're proposing. Yeah. So my warning on turning points. From the moment I got enough information to raise substantial concerns for me, I went on my Facebook page. I have duty to protect and duty to warn obligations as a psychologist, and I'm warning people that based on my review of the available information regarding the Turning Points experimental treatment program for severe attachment pathology that is being marketed by a social worker, Ms. Gottlieb, to the family courts and to parents, I have prominent professional concerns that this treatment would actually meet DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for child psychological abuse, specifically an invalidating environment that's discussed by Linehan associated with borderline processes. So, yeah, I have serious problems with that. So I would be warning parents and warning the courts to stay away from this program based on what I know about it. And I'm more than happy to debate this with Ms. Gottlieb if she wants to get up and do an online moderated debate about turning points or 4-day workshops or parental alienation or things. But they don't. They don't answer questions. They don't debate things. They just stay in their little locked zone of personal imaginings where they're experts because they say they are. So this is Jennifer Harmon's research. I use the term loosely. Evaluation of Turning Points for Families program for severely alienated children. Now, again, there's no such thing as alienation. I would say just the title itself is in violation of 2.04 of the APA Ethics Code, but they don't care. They don't care. They don't care about applying knowledge. They just want to be experts, and they continue on with this parental alienation stuff that solved nothing and continues the controversy. But here's the opening sentence in the abstract from this article. If we continue with parental alienation, this continues, I'll probably wind up doing a full fireside chat on this article. But the Turning Points for Families therapeutic intervention program for severely alienated children and their alienated parents was evaluated to determine whether it was safe and did not cause harm. Excuse me, why do you think it might be unsafe and might cause harm? Whoa. How did you get this past an IRB, Institutional Review Board, when you're doing some experimental therapy? It's a treatment. They define it as a treatment. Now, Dorsey says that's not treatment, and I agree with her. It's not treatment. But Gottlieb is coming up with a treatment model based on her own imaginings and her own definitions of what the pathology is, not anchored in any established knowledge. And they're worried about whether it's safe or could cause harm. Holy cow, how did you get that past your IRB? And they say that it led to positive changes and positive. What does that mean, positive changes? Did you fix the bond? Did you fix it in 4 days? Or did you get positive changes? What does that mean? In the alienated parent, alienated child relationship, and then goes on and it says this preliminary evidence indicates that the Turning Points program is similar to other therapeutic structural interventions. No, it's not similar to anything. Okay, it's a unique development of this social worker to treat severe attachment pathology, and she's not competent in attachment pathology. She's never treated attachment pathology. Yeah, that's just so many problems. Is a safe and effective treatment option for severely alienated children. How do you operationally define severely alienated? But they say it's effective. Did it restore the bond? I say no, it didn't. Not based on the review of the research and what she did here. But I want to point out, because I've work in university settings in my career and stuff, and I know how IRBs work. I was on a invited presentation about internet research by OPRR, the who oversees the IRBs. I know how IRBs do around safety issues, and holy cow, they'd be really worried about safety. So one of my little birds, I call them, little helper people who go out and find stuff and do stuff. I was expressing that concern one time on my Facebook, and they went and requested the IRB protocol from Colorado State for Jennifer's study. It's number 1704. And so we got it, the IRB approval for this. And interestingly, what Jennifer did is she put it through an expedited review. Oh, that's how the IRB approved a study about safety of an experimental new treatment, is because they were reassured it was totally safe. And so it was an expedited, they didn't take a close look at her, what she was doing. And so it says on the IRB form, it says expedited review categories. For research to qualify for an expedited category, all aspects of the study must present no more than minimal risk to the participants and fit into one of. Well, if the study itself is to find out if it's safe, that's more than minimal risk to the participants. You don't know whether that's going to be a risk to the participant or not, because that's your study, is to see if it's safe based on some criteria you're coming up with. So I would suggest that she misrepresented what she was doing to her IRB. And now that's going to come back and haunt her, because it's not safe. it's extraordinarily problematic, and that's going to be uncovered. And then their credibility, Dr. Harmon's credibility, is going to tank. And Colorado State, who approved this research that supports an unsafe intervention based on kind of manipulating what the situation is, Colorado State's going to face a lot of controversy as ProPublica begins to expose the whole stuff, the kind of nightmare underneath the surface here. So take another look at something Harmon, Sanders, and Afifi. And I wonder on this category, because Harmon's a researcher, who's the clinical expert? If they're assessing a clinical therapy intervention, who's the clinical psychologist that's on the team here? I don't know which one's the clinical psychologist, but they should be violating 2.04. And why aren't they coming in with clinical knowledge on this? But the whole methodology of this research is extraordinarily suspect. So court orders and video recordings. The moment I ran into video recordings, I say, whoa, that's confidential information. If you're dealing with a family court situation and children and stuff, you shouldn't be sending confidential information from Gottlieb to Harmon unless you have consent of the participants, or the consent of the court in this matter, if the court's referring into your program. So all the people who viewed those videotapes, that's a breach of confidentiality of the treatment. And so I have worries about that, proper consents on the confidentiality thing. And then, somebody like me, well, this is how research works. Somebody like me, I could challenge their findings. And so I could ask to see their data and see the videotapes and see their ratings for those. And I'd have to go down to Colorado State, and I could watch the videos and watch their ratings, because that's how research works. We're allowed to see the data. Other researchers are allowed to see the data. But if I do that, if I'm watching the videos, then that's a breach of confidentiality. So just that whole idea of rating videotapes on this, I don't know how she passed that through IRB on confidentiality and informed consent issues and surrounding the court. And does the court know she's given out the videotapes of her treatment to these people or friends? And so they did the video recordings of the 4-day intervention, were reviewed for indications of improvement. That, you see how they're just softening it up? And it's just a matter of personal opinion. So you got these researchers looking at videotapes saying, I think there's indications of improvement. Did they fix the pathology? Is it how's affection, cooperation, social involvement? How's a targeted parent rating those? Are they fixed 4 days? Based on my review of reports going into the court, no, they're not. They're far from fixed in 4 days. It's still a substantial breach in the attachment bond after the end of 4 days of her program, but they found indications of improvement. So this is starting to feel or feels like a marketing effort by her buddy who's doing research. She wants to become more of an expert in parental alienation, and so she gets together and agrees to do this study to show that Turning Points is safe and effective. So then Linda can market it into the family courts and get these court orders to um, send children to this program. So, indications of improvement over the course of intervention in relational communication, social support, and communal coping. Such vague terms. Was a relationship fixed? No, it wasn't. Which refers to the family members jointly owning a problem and proactively taking responsibility for it together. That's just nonsense. Okay, that's my view. So I have zero problems about that. That's also the view of um, Elena Andreopoulos and Alison Wexler from Maastricht University and Alliant University, who also had serious concerns about this research by Harmon and these 4-day workshops. And they looked at overcoming barriers, which is no longer, it's defunct, and turning points. Interestingly, they didn't look at the other category, which is family bridges and the high road protocol. Another interesting thing is University of Maastricht has like a world-renowned forensic psychology program. It's in the Netherlands. And when I was over in the Netherlands presenting, one of the professors there offered a very gracious offer to have me teach in one of her courses on forensic psychology. And so I was, after Dorsey and I went and I presented at Erasmus, and then she was on the panel after that, after the panel discussion. And then we went to meet with the Dutch representatives from the Dutch Ministry of Justice down in The Hague. And then after that, we drove down to Maastricht, and Dorsey went shopping while I spoke at Maastricht University. Delightful little town, delightful place. I would recommend, if that Scandinavia, Europe does a pilot program for the family courts, I would suggest putting Maastricht University in charge of the outcome research for it. And that was a suggestion that Dorsey and I made to the Dutch Ministry of Justice. Do a pilot program for the family courts, and I would suggest Maastricht University head up the research on that. But they had serious problems about turning points and the methodology of Harmon's research, and I would agree with them 100% on that. Interesting, the solution to parental alienation, I kind of take credit for that because that's my meme structure solution, and it's you can see it entering people's minds, and so that's kind of interesting. I can talk about that later. But one of the things they say, opening up in their abstract, they say parental alienation is a phenomenon in psychology that has garnered tremendous controversy over the past 60 years. We're still in controversy. Let's stop using the construct. Let's go back to established knowledge and stop fighting around these children. The mental health people, stop fighting around these children. Especially in the realm of high conflict divorce cases, parental alienation is considered by some mental health professionals as a great concern that can be resolved through reunification therapy. There's no such thing as reunification therapy. Show me a book that talks about that. These people just make stuff up or related educational programs. Yeah, I've got data on it. I've got data. You see that. A single case ABA, Dorsey's got data. I've seen the protocol. I know what she's doing. I understand entirely what she's doing. We went down and presented the protocol to the AFCC in 2017. We presented the data to the American Psychological Association, peer reviewed in 2019. So yeah, if you have a proper workshop and you have the proper change agent and you're doing things from a base of knowledge, then yeah, that's going to be, you're going to get effective. Got the data to show that. So me, stop using parental alienation. Everybody stop using that. Let's stop. There is no defined pathology of parental alienation in clinical psychology. The use of that construct is, in the professional capacity, is substantially beneath professional standards of practice in clinical psychology. It degrades the quality of professional services in the family courts, and it is in violation of ethical standard 2.04, Bases for Scientific and Professional Judgments of the American Psychological Association. The pathology in the family courts apply knowledge to solve pathology. It's a shared persecutory delusion and false, factitious attachment pathology imposed on the child by the pathogenic parenting of a narcissistic, borderline dark personality parent. That's all real stuff. For secondary gain of manipulating the court's decisions regarding child custody and to meet the emotional and psychological needs of the pathological parent. Google ignorant, lack of knowledge or information. If you're still using parental alienation, you are ignorant by definition of the English language. That is the pathology. And indolent, wanting to avoid activity or exertion, lazy. If you're still using the construct of parental alienation in the professional capacity, you are simply lazy. You're just too lazy to know the actual knowledge, so you give yourself permission to make stuff up. Ignorant and unethical practice is unacceptable. Period. The lives of children hangs in the balance of the court's decisions. The children in the courts deserve the highest caliber of professional practice, not the lowest. So if you have an idea that you could develop, discovering some sort of new pathology, that's great. Apply knowledge first. Attachment, family systems, delusional thought disorders, personality. Apply all the established knowledge first, as you are ethically required to do. Then, if you haven't answered your questions, if you haven't solved the pathology from the application of knowledge, then you can propose your new pathology proposal. Bring your research. But after you apply knowledge, not before and not instead of. Okay? The court's decisions are too immense for this child to just be making stuff up and degrading the quality of professional services and driving professional psychology into controversy and conflict for 60 years where we solve nothing because of your approach to definitions. 2.04 of the APA Ethics Code, Bases for Scientific and Professional Knowledge. The APA Ethics Code says what it says. Psychologists' work is based on the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline. That is attachment, Bowlby and others, family systems, Mnuchin and others, personality disorders, complex trauma and child abuse, child development, Tronick and others, and the DSM-5 diagnostic system. That is the established knowledge we are required, mandatory, to apply as the basis for our professional judgments, not parental alienation. Okay, so apply that first. Then, if you want to talk about parental alienation and new pathology, you can do that, but it does not relieve you of your ethical obligations. So the unethical practice hurts people, and we can see that the impact of that over the last 60 years of controversy. That all the families that have been hurt by the make-believe world of parental alienation and forensic custody evaluation. Stop, and reunification therapy. Stop making things up. Apply knowledge to solve pathology. The ethics code is mandatory. Ethical practice is not optional. It is required. Apply knowledge to solve pathology. Ignorance solves nothing. And so all these parental alienation, self-proclaimed experts are just unethical, in my view. And they can answer that. Want to put it on a debate? Let's put it on a debate. I'm more than happy to debate this with anybody at any point in time. Does parental alienation exist? An online moderated debate. Let's do that. Let's get it hosted. Parental alienation study group. Let's host that up. AFCC. Let's host that up. You get somebody to take the affirmative that parental alienation exists. Anybody you want. Bill Burnett, Robin Deutsch. Pick somebody to represent that parental alienation works or exists. And I'll take the negative on that and say, no, it doesn't. It's a shared persecutory delusion and factitious attachment pathology, and you're just simply too ignorant to know that. And so you've given yourself permission to make stuff up to cover up your ignorance and indolence and pure laziness. But they won't. They don't debate anything. They don't answer questions. They don't talk about anything. They just stay in their zone, creating conflict and creating and degrading the quality of mental health services in the family courts. And so 4-day workshops, summary and conclusions regarding this. So first off, they're not all the same. There's basically two categories. There's Family Bridges and High Road, which use one approach to things. Family Bridges continues to rely on parental alienation. Dorsey doesn't. Dorsey has switched over to the application of established knowledge because she's smart. She's the top professional in family courts. And when I came along and diagnosed the pathology, she says, absolutely, I'm on that train of applied knowledge, because that's the future, and that gives us solutions, and gives us solutions right away, gives us a child abuse diagnosis right away. It solves things right away. And so she relies on the child abuse diagnosis by the mental health professional to make, and she in her custody resolution method, she tags for the 3 diagnostic indicators I recommend and the 12 associated clinical signs, and has produced research related to the prevalence of those in the family courts. Overcoming barriers, that's not even worth talking about. That was completely ineffective. That was your forensic psychologist entry. They should have been consulting with Dorsey or Richard, or I would recommend Dorsey. She's the best, most experienced professional in the family courts in a variety of ways. She's got 2 research studies, Dorsey does, on using different research methodologies. So she's got a research study on the High Road using single case ABA design that's been peer reviewed, presented to the American Psychological Association. And she's got a content analysis using data coding from all the data surrounding these family conflicts. That's now up on ResearchGate, Greenham, Childress, and Pruter, and this in the publication track at some point here. And so she's got 2 research studies on the actual pathology in the family courts. She's the best researcher in the family courts by far. She's the best interventionist. She's been solving this, recovered hundreds of children over the years. And High Road will work every single time, because it's working with the child's natural bonding. And when she told me that back in 2014, we're meeting in my office, and I looked at the protocol and I said, that's going to work. And I know exactly how that's going to work. And I said, what's your success rate with that? And she told me 100%. Now, nothing's 100%. And I went, whoa. And I thought about it and I went, yeah, I can actually see that. The based on what she does in the protocol, I can see it being 100% successful with these kids. And it is. It's documented. She's got all the data. She can back it up if anybody ever cares to solve the pathology. But she's taken such tremendous disrespect in the family courts. And the flying monkeys. She gets hit by the flying monkeys in the pathology because she solves the pathology. And they don't want that. The pathological parent and their surrounding monkeys do not want the pathology solved. So they have come after her hard, and she survived. She stayed here, and she's still prospering in the family courts. You don't prosper in the family courts for 15 years unless you're the real deal. So we basically have one category of these workshops that I think are effective. So Dorsey Pruter, the High Road workshop, that's proven effective. I've reviewed the protocol and personally observed all 4 days of the workshop. the High Road Workshop has my full and complete endorsement. Family Bridges, it's based on the same change agent principles as a High Road Workshop due to a collaboration of Dr. Rand and Ms. Pruter on developing the protocol, and then each one went off to develop the application of it. And so I have not reviewed the protocol for Family Bridges, but I would say if it's based on the same approach, it's likely to be effective. Then we have, but then of the two, I would just go with Dorsey. She's custody resolution method, higher purpose parenting, training coaches, and doing this recovery for 15 years. She is, in my view, the most experienced professional in the family courts surrounding the pathology and the recovery of children from child abuse and complex trauma. So, yeah, hands down, I think she's got the best program, and it's effective. Then we have the second category of these 4-day workshops, overcoming barriers. It's completely ineffective and now defunct because it was ill-conceived from the very beginning by these forensic psychologists, and so it failed. And then we have Turning Points by this Gardner PAS, self-proclaimed expert. And I would just provide warnings based on what I know of that. I would say it's not effective. It's being run by an ignorant, incompetent, unethical approach just from the get-go. And there's apparent multiple substantial ethical violations associated with it, and apparently psychologically abusive for the child. Now, again, she can answer these questions, please, but she doesn't answer. She doesn't talk. She doesn't provide a protocol to outside people and things. And basically, from what I see, she's just relying on the separation period. And she's not doing any therapy or any treatment of anything. She's just trying to coerce, saying, you're not going to go back and see your other parent until you do what I want you to do. And it's just, in my view, highly coercive. And that's invalidating environments as well. And so outside and independent review of Turning Points is absolutely necessary. And I'm in full agreement with the ProPublica articles and the people. So if you ask me, are you supportive of 4-day workshops or not, Dr. Childress, I would say it depends on the workshop. So I'm fully supportive of the High Road Workshop because I know what it does, and Dorsey answers questions, and Dorsey is capable and competent, knowledgeable, implies knowledge. And I'm not at all in support of either overcoming barriers when it was existent or Turning Points now. I think that needs serious outside review. So what I would recommend, in my conclusion here, is a pilot program for the family courts with university involvement for outcome research that's needed to develop the standardized and agreed upon diagnostic assessment and treatment protocols to the differential diagnoses of concern for each parent. And we need that to bring the professional conflicts surrounding these children to an end and to make it safe for the clinical psychologists, the treatment psychologists, not custody, to return to court-involved professional practice. And so I would do a pilot program for the family courts, and when the diagnosis of child psychological abuse is made and removed from the diagnostic phase to the treatment phase, right in that transition period, I would drop Dorsey's High Road Workshop into that to recover the children in 4 days, comfortably, happily. If you look at Dorsey's data here, that child at the end of 2 days is up on like 5s and 6s on affection and cooperation. The child is happy as it could be. The child is feeling wonderful with that. Look at that. He's feeling great. And so this is a very gentle, wonderful, supportive approach for restoring love and bonding within the family. There's no safety issues. Look at that. I mean, the kid's wonderful off of this. So you just drop that in, make that transition back into bonded relationships easy for the child. And then after the 4 days, you then do the follow-up care therapist, just like in this situation. And so it's a collaboration of the recovery workshop and then moving into the follow-up care treatment. And if you do a pilot program for that, and drop Dorsey right in that transition phase, then that's she can train the university researchers to do half of them. She can do half of them. You can look at the Dorsey effect. Is it the protocol or is it just something magical about who she is? And I suspect it's a little bit of both. But the protocol will be effective. It works for family bridges, and so but then that's a nice way of transferring that protocol into the university research domain and into the treatment domain. So then people can start doing and adapting and doing additional research on it and moving it over to substance abuse or prison recidivism and doing all this kind of stuff. Dorsey would keep the trademark to the high road, become the queen goddess of recovery, and then the other institutions would then get the protocol and they could begin to expand on that in the research. So that would be my recommendation for how things work. But all the controversy that's currently surrounding these 4-day workshops is based on ignorance. The people don't know. So there's different types out there, and this is too important to act from ignorance, especially when you have a recovery like this. Holy Toledo, look at that second B phase. Why would you deny a child this? 3 years of documented child abuse, and we can recover a healthy bond within 2 days, 4 days. Why would you deny this to the child? And then we restore a normal range healthy attachment bond, and then we restore with the abusive parent with the safeguards in place to make sure the abuse doesn't resume. And so, yeah, I was a follow-up care therapist. This kid recovered wonderfully and was stable even after restoring with the abusive parent. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my fireside chat on 4-day workshops. I believe all mental health professionals, if you're not consulting with Dorsey Pruter about the pathology, yeah, that's a problem. The Dr. Childress, knowing everything I know, look at my response to Miss Pruter. I'm just fully support her, and she's the most experienced professional in the family courts regarding the pathology and the recovery of kids from complex trauma. So if you take my lead or my model, then you'll be consulting with her as well. So with that, hold on. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to end up my fireside chat on 4-day workshops and